So, we'd like to hear from you what you'd like to do. Shall we do this talk about the basics and then talk? I see people nodding heads. We're getting more people, aren't we? Can we do that? Everybody, there's a couple handouts here. One right here. If you haven't gotten one, maybe you can take that. I'll be as quick and kind of summarize it as best I can. The handout has an article that goes through this again if I lose you in a few spots. You can read it again in the article, and then there's references there. And the issues that arise from genetic engineering are listed there. But I'm not going to go into the issues because there just isn't time. If there's any question about the effects of Roundup, because Roundup is used in genetic engineering, I have a file here of the health effects of Roundup studies. These are scientific studies. The health effects of Roundup and the soil and plant effects of Roundup. Their studies are in here, but they're listed on the front because Monsanto promotes it as being environmentally benign, and I find that offensive. Everything in your body works starting from a cell. And that's what gives us an understanding of genetic engineering. So we start with a cell. And I have a metaphor here. So with that metaphor in mind, let's go to how a protein is made. Because we're getting toward how genetic engineering is done. So it's clear, it should be clear, hopefully. There's another method of, instead of using the vector, there's something called a gene gun, where they coat tiny particles of some metal and with the construct and just shoot it into the cells and hope it hits in the right spot and is incorporated into the DNA properly. So, as you can see, there's no control over where in the genome the construct lands. There's no control over how many copies in the cell you're going to get. There's no control over what effect it has on the DNA of the host cell. Or it can also scramble the construct. It can scramble the host cell DNA. It can scramble the construct. Disrupt what's already there. There's no control over whether the plant defenses are activated or not.
Questions? Or, I mean, what happens here, I mean, there's two big myths that the corporations are foisting on the rest of the world, and very systematic. You heard the guy on the TV here talking about public relations, and you know, this is a very concerted $50 million a year campaign to promote two myths. One is that this process is safe, predictable, well understood, and just like conventional plant breeding, and it's highly regulated. Well, it's obviously not. We don't have a clue, is what it comes down to, and there's a number of examples of that are out functioning in nature, and Monsanto's even been sued over a couple of them. And the second big myth is that this is kind of risky, but you hear, you know, we got to have this technology to feed the world, and there's no alternative. There's no other way to feed the burgeoning population of the planet. And so these are the two that I run into all the time. Every time we have some debate with one of these guys in industry, that's what you know. They're in the vernacular of public relations. They're on message, and boy, are they! I mean, every time you hear this, it's the same thing. This is really predictable, well understood, and highly regulated. Well, if anybody wants to read about what Jill's explained here in more detail, the February 2001, is that what it is? Harper's, someone could read. Actually has an article by Barry Commoner in it that explains, you know, in written form what Jill's just explained, if you want to review this. Very clear, semi-technical explanation of what we don't know. That this whole system rests on the assumption that one piece of DNA makes one and only one protein. That if you put that piece of DNA from a bacteria, that construct in this plant, and that's the only thing it's going to make. Well, that's wrong. That's this flat not true. I mean, you can get, there's a fruit fly that they've done work with where one string of DNA has been proven to make 3,000 different proteins, depending on environmental responses, all these triggers, all these multiple mechanisms in there, how you amplify, and there's no way to predict that control and both in the cell and the response to the environment that triggers those kind of changes. That's something we don't even begin to understand, what regulates those expressions. And an example of that is in Roundup Ready soybeans. They've taken a gene, this construct right here, to make an enzyme that breaks down the molecule that's toxic to plant that makes Roundup a good herbicide. Roundup kills everything. If it's a plant, it kills it. And so this makes the plant, Roundup Ready wheat, will have a gene that makes an enzyme that breaks down glyphosate, the molecule in Roundup, before the plant is killed. And that's what makes it resistant. Well, they've done this with soybeans. It's grown all over the place. And that theoretically is the only thing that gene is doing in that soybean plant, right? Well, what happened is, summer before last, in most of the South, they had a real heat wave. It was Alabama, Georgia, and all of a sudden, all this genetically modified soybeans, the stems started shattering and fell over. And this kind of upset farmers, obviously. And non-genetically engineered soybeans of the same genetic types, varieties, didn't do this. And so what happened, sticking that construct in a soybean plant, made it resistant to Roundup, but it also changed the architecture of the stem. That's not one gene happening to one spot in one plant. That's a fundamental alteration of the architecture of lignin and cellulose metabolism in a plant, and probably has 50 or 60 different functional enzymes that were affected to go into making a stem. That's how little we know about this system. These guys are clueless, and they sit around and tell us that this is all heavily regulated, and it's not. Roundup Ready wheat will be introduced in Montana with no publicly available safety testing whatsoever at all. FDA just says, well, it's the same as regular wheat except for that one gene, go ahead and plant it. The regulatory approval for Roundup Ready wheat will be a variety permit issued by USDA, and they issue a variety permit for every other kind of variety that's released in general commerce. There is no safety testing, no evaluation of this, no understanding what's going to happen when they put that out there, when we eat it. And
it's out there right now, right?
it's in 30 some odd different field trials in Montana.
I have a question that basically what you're saying here is that all of this genetic engineering is to make a product that will be sold and is by big corporations and makes a lot of money for big companies.
This gets to the next piece of the discussion here is you know, big myth is we got to do stuff like, you know, the golden rice is going to save kids from blindness, and we're going to, I mean, the latest one I read was we've engineered a potato to overproduce a protein, so now you have high protein potatoes in India. And you know, all this sounds really technologically good, but it's primarily publicity stunts. I mean, you know, you know, they gave some money to this scientific team, and they solved some technical issues in getting there. But there is no commercial market for it, because the people who need vitamin A to make up for vitamin A deficiency have vitamin A deficiency because they can't pay for it, you know. And or as Vandana Shiva said about I read some about an article she had about genetic, you know, high protein potatoes for India. She said, well, you know, what's wrong with lentils? You know, I mean, and the problem is people are too damn poor in India to buy lentils anymore. And so that's where you get into this much larger discussion of why people on the planet are really hungry. And maybe the Monsantos of the world are doing us a favor in triggering this discussion. So what causes hunger, and what are the solutions?
This discussion does boil down to agriculture and the socioeconomic impacts of
it's an
agriculture.
economic
I'm not
issue.
going to dress it up with starvation or nutrients or whatever. There's classical breeding, and every plant, whether it's the corn or whatever, is a product of classical breeding. If I showed you a corn from South America, you would not believe that it was corn.
Yeah,
And native corn, the
T-Cell
remnants
is
of
gonna
the
look
are
at it
now.
out there, yeah.
It took thousands and thousands of years to classically breed modern corn from what that was. We're looking at, we're using a different selective force now with genetic engineering as opposed to the classic, or the, what's come to be, you know, Mendelian breeding principles. The whole problem is the agriculture that we produced. It's low in nutrients, it's low in food value, it's low in vitamin A. You had to give that up to produce a bigger seed, to produce lots of bigger seeds. The food's empty. We want to put value back in the food by genetically engineering it, and we took it out classically.
Right.
Yeah,
Not
exactly.
right in it.
That's a good point.
Yeah, what this gets to is, the other question that, at least for me, gets focused by this whole discussion of genetic engineering is not so much genetic engineering, that's certainly a big piece of it, but it's just two diametrically opposed ways of looking at agriculture. I mean, you got the people, you know, genetic engineering is an extension of 50 years of industrialization in agriculture, where we try to force one big crop, one big solution on everybody, so that you grow the same corn in Iowa that you grow in Mexico, that you grow in Africa. And that you make big monocultures of this, and not coincidentally, some big companies get to control all the seed for the big monocultures. But there's a system of, I don't know what you call it, of systematically removing diversity from the system. That one size fits all.
Right.
We've done that with agriculture, and the problem of hunger in the world is we've done it with economics and social systems, that there's one economic model that's going to fit the whole world. And that combination is what's really creating the poverty that leaves people hungry. The other alternative model to this, and where all the alternatives fit, is a framework that says, you know, agriculture and social economic systems that go with it need to be diverse and they need to be local. And there's two really different models going on here, and they are not compatible in any way, shape, or form. And the thing that really worries me about genetic engineering is the fragility of the system. I mean, we now have much of the corn in the U.S., the parental varieties in the hybrids. One side of those hybrids, there's very, very limited genetic base. It's kind of expensive to do this, so I only engineer a few lines and use those to cross with a whole bunch of other lines to make different hybrids, but you end up with a whole bunch of very same genetics in all over the Midwest. We used to have corn bred as hybrids. Down individual counties in Iowa would have different varieties of corn for the soil and the wind and the weather and whatever number of growing days, and we're losing all that because it's too expensive to do. And that fragility is just really scary in major crops. I walked in with globalization. This is an example. I don't want to ramble too much here, but I watched an introduced bug, a whitefly, in Mexico, western Mexico, in the state of Sinaloa. Used to grow a lot of soybeans in the summertime. That's where all our vegetables come from. About 2/3 of the fresh packed tomatoes in the United States come from Sinaloa State in Mexico, on the western side of Mexico. All those little Roma tomatoes in the store. Well, they grow those in the winter. They used to grow soybeans in the summer, about 400,000 hectares. That's almost 1 million acres of soybeans. The little bug, this whitefly, got loose in there, and I was there the last year they grew soybeans in Sinaloa. That whitefly ate 400,000 hectares of soybeans in one city.
Hungry with a wife.
Yeah, I mean, literally, you had to, walking downtown in Los Mochis city, we're surrounded by all this agriculture, you had to wear a mask because there were so many whiteflies in the air. And you'd see endless fields, hundreds of thousands of acres of soybeans, black and limp, because of this bug.
I would have thought that the Mexicans would have sprayed lots of poison.
They sprayed all kinds of poisons on it, and if you've got a population like that and you kill 99% of it, two things happen. The 1% left is still enough to do damage,
Right.
and that's the 1% that reproduces resistance. You can't do evolution faster than multiple sprays on a rapidly reproducing insect.
I've been telling people that genetic engineering isn't necessarily bad. You can either use it for good or bad purposes, and this lady mentioned the vitamin E gene, and you held up the magazine.
Yeah.
Just a minute, but you didn't say if that was good or bad.
Okay, well,
Is genetic engineering always risky?
Well, it's irrelevant. I mean, that was a publicity stunt. There's been a number of publicity stunts. And I am not using that term loosely. I mean, it is a public relations exercise, very deliberately done. And this brings up the fundamental issue here is, you know, this has been heavily criticized because it doesn't make enough vitamin E. You have to eat about, what is it, 9 pounds of rice a day or something to get enough vitamin A to make a difference. Well, you know, it's kind of tough to eat 9 pounds of dry rice a day. But you know, and the response to that was, okay, we're going to engineer it to make more vitamin A. Well, the response I've thought about and heard from people talking who live in those places in the world where there's vitamin A deficiency blindness is, what's wrong with bok choy? You know, in Southeast Asia where this deficiency is the worst, and I've seen little kids with vitamin A deficiency blindness, and it just, I mean, it is nasty to see because it's just, there's no reason for it. And so little kids being led around by other little kids because they can't see because they don't have enough to eat. And the problem is, I mean, Bandana Sheep has written about this, other people. My wife's a nutritionist, so I had the nutritional tables. Your average bok choy has 275 times more vitamin A ounce per ounce than golden rice. And the issue is not making golden rice have more vitamin A. The issue is how come people can't buy bok choy? You know, there's 120 kinds of vegetables grown in South Asia. Think about a Chinese restaurant and how many kinds of leafy green vegetables you can get in a tropical Southeast Asian climate. And they're leafy green, they got vitamin A in them. I mean, it's just pretty much that simple. And the problem is the Green Revolution has replaced agricultural diversity with two things. One, monocultures of white rice, and number two, people who don't have money to buy vegetables. And if you had money to buy vegetables, you could walk down the market and buy a bok choy. Your average mother in Southeast Asia knows enough to feed her kids a balanced diet. And they just don't have, you work in a sweatshop for Nike, make $2 a day, and you don't have enough money to buy food. That's the #1 cause of poverty and hunger on this planet is bad wages.
And it's getting worse.
And it's getting worse.
But one of the main ramifications of biotechnology that we haven't touched upon yet, and I would say also, it's a technology like television. We could do good things with it, but it depends what comes through television, you know. It depends how biotechnology is viewed. Right now, biotechnology is totally in the hands of multinational corporations. Their only value, determining factor of their decisions is profit. And so they're using biotechnology for making massive profit. And it doesn't equate with good for society. Corporate values, the corporate value does not equate with what is good for society. And we, as a country, have kind of accepted that what is good for corporations, you know, it has become the American, our strategic interest. What they say, what is in our strategic interest, has become equated to what is good for corporations. And I think we need to question that strongly and be engaged. But what's coming out of biotechnology that the corporations are control also, and we haven't touched upon it, is that also in 1980, same year that the Bayh-Dole Act was passed, the Supreme Court, a case was taken to the Supreme Court which questioned whether living organisms could be patented. And the Supreme Court said, yes, you can now patent a living organism. It was the first biotech organism, genetically engineered bacteria, was taken to the Supreme Court in 1980. Well, that opened the door. Once you could patent a living organism, that opened the door for the corporations. And they saw gold through that door. And they started buying the seed companies, the pharmaceutical companies, and any biotech company that hung up a sign, you know, would get venture capital and soon get bought up, whatever. Big money went into the whole thing. And like Steve Jones says, the last wheat breeder at land-grant universities in the country that is not bought up by corporations. These varieties of food, as the man in the back said earlier, which have been produced by us through traditional breeding over 10,000 years, have been handed down from our ancestors to us. They belong to everyone, and the land-grant universities had a mandate to continue that process, but give it freely. They gave seed freely to the farmers. That was their charter. But now, since 1980, the protection of plant varieties before 1980 was the Plant Variety Protection Act, which still allowed farmers to save their own seed and researchers to work on it. But it gave the people who developed the hybrids a little bit of a edge for making profit with it. But now it's patented, which means Monsanto can slap a technology fee on every bag that the farmers have to pay. The farmers have to sign a contract that says they can't even question the results, that the company isn't liable for any cross-pollination. There's all kinds of crazy things in the contracts that Monsanto is pushing on the farmers. And the companies are taking these varieties that both the land-grant universities and our ancestors have given all of humanity, and are saying, no, this belongs to us. Nobody can trade it. You can't save your own seed. You have to pay technology fees to us. We control all the research that goes down the pipe in the future on this variety.
And they're doing this in third world countries.
Well,
yeah, these are multinational
patenting
corporations.
of living organisms is one thing that has come out of this. That we as citizens need to start being involved in the discussion on how this technology is used and the ramifications from it.
I've spent 31 years rescuing the native genetics for corn from this region and breeding it and sending it off to starving nations and feeding hundreds of thousands of people. I have almost no genetic allies, so if there's anybody in this room, I was hoping to meet you, say hello to me later. But my question still didn't get answered. We understand biotech gene splicing is bad for the BT gene. I don't understand if it's good or bad for the vitamin A gene, but is there good and bad genetic engineering, or is it always carry that unpredictable risk that the wrong thing will make the combinations?
Well, the way it's being done here is bad with the vector, the pathological organisms.
And that's being used for the vitamin A method too, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in other words, just this
But the
method
whole
is always
study
risky.
that revolves around it is giving us more information about how biological systems work.
Yeah.
And there are techniques that are being developed that potentially could be beneficial. But
Right.
if the corporations have control of them, they won't be. That's my
Okay.
One of the things that happens to us is what I was trying to get to, and probably didn't do it very well, is we asked the wrong question. It's not whether.
Everybody asks me that question.
You have that risk. Let me try another shot at this. I understand what you're asking. I think. See if I
You're a
can.
little over my head, really.
No. It's a matter. I mean, this is where the alternatives come in. Particularly the United States, we have a really bad habit of facing ourselves with only two choices. And you have genetic engineering and your vitamin A deficiency, or you have,
Not in the environment.
yeah, that we don't look at we don't give ourselves any choices.
I heard you.
And there's all kinds of other ways to get at the same issues that
I know.
genetic engineering gets at. So you got this kind of risk to go with golden rice, but there's no reason.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, it's the same risk with, these techniques are used for all genetic engineering.
That's all I
of
wanted
the
to know.
crops that are out there now.
Yeah.
That's what everybody asks me.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there are new techniques being developed
Okay.
that are going to be different than this. But
There's still no reason to do it.
Yeah, what's the goal?
Yeah.
profit.
What is
It's
it?
the
No, I know what
corporations that
the
are doing it.
corporation's thing is, is
It's
profit.
dominance through food.
No, slow down a minute.
Ownership and ownership.
No, I'm trying to get a different thought in here, and I don't know
Yeah.
how to
Sorry
go
about
about it, is what I'm really after.
Take your time.
I have been thinking and thinking, it's not coming up, so. But anyway, because you guys are, everybody is so worried about genetic engineering, and is there some way to use this effectively, then oh my God, if we don't solve it, we're not gonna get what? What is the goal? I don't care about the corporations, they can take a flying leap. I've been termaline's pretty close to it. I've been fighting chemical poisoning for 8 years. I should have been dead 8 years ago. You can bring yourself back from kidney failure and everything else and be healthy. You don't need genetic engineering. You don't need any of these things. So my question sort of is, what is it that everybody in here is looking at and going, oh, but we could use this, but okay, for what? What is the goal? What is it that everybody really wants solved? Is it to take care of the other countries? Is it for us? What is it we want solved? And then I have another statement about it.
What the
Is it
people
to
who-
be healthy? What is our goal?
I think
I mean,
it's-
that's what I was trying, there are two completely opposite sets of goals going on here.
Yeah, I know the corporations, well, everybody
Well,
knows that.
there's another goal, that you use diversity,
But they're using fear, and what's the one that we've got going that we keep
is
grabbing for their thing?
the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre is the
A better
alternative here.
world is possible.
When you have
Of course it is.
diversity,
But you gotta start here
where
at home.
instead of, you know, I mean, and this is where it's a social and economic issue, not a biology issue. That we need in economics as if people mattered, if I can paraphrase this.
And in agriculture as if,
Farmers mattered.
life.
Yeah, and you can get there, the alternative here is you've got an industrial model of agriculture, and the alternative is, there's various buzzwords here, but it's a knowledge-based agriculture. It's local and diverse, and you get there by understanding the system, the biology of what's going on that makes it function, but it can't be separate from the community that it's in. You know,
That's when the
industrial
problems arise.
agriculture, you've got investors who live in boardrooms and labor. In real agriculture, you have farmers who have ownership in the land that they work, as opposed to picking tomatoes off a land owned by some corporation. And you have farmers who are invested in their own community. And that's where we're heading. I mean, that's the different models here. And whether this is in Brazil or Montana, that's, you know, we need wheat that's sold
Okay.
by Montana farmers at a real price so that they can go to the local store in Conrad and buy other stuff, you know, and that's what we're losing.
But I want to
Maybe in the back.
I think that part of it is sort of like the Star Trek thing, you know, go out and find new worlds, and if we can do it, we should do it. I think that's an extremely dangerous thought, because, you know, my dad was an engineer, and he had some ideas for the Mission Valley that I would have been fighting him all the way if it had dawned on me what it was he was doing. Oh, we can do it because we can do it, or we should do it because we can do it, and I think that mentality is underlying a lot of this, and it's sort of like if the mountain is there, then we should climb it.
Conquer all the time.
And, you know, so maybe it's knowledge-based, but it's the idea that, and that's where technology has completely outdistanced any kind of ethic that we can develop. As the technology is developing, we haven't developed the ethic that goes with it.
Well, part of the thing I was trying to get at that I haven't incorporated in is that, and I know several people, or two different sources in the valley, they're doing this. In the 40s and 30s and 40s, I can't remember exactly where the 40s are in there, there was a man that came over here anyway, he told us, did a, what do you call it, anyway, a talk several years ago from England, about how our government consciously made a decision in, it was the 30s and 40s, to pay the farmers to do the chemicals, and not to pay them to put the nutrition back in the soil, which is a key of what is missing. Because plants cannot be a nutritious plant grown out of soil that has no nutrition. And if you've got food that is nutritious, it doesn't take such a grand quantity, and you can feed a whole lot more people. I'm not degrading the other, but it's just that we haven't got there yet. But this part, if we clean up a little bit of it along the way, and there are two different sources I know of people just in this valley who can put nutrition back in the soil naturally, and it takes care of some of the toxin factors, and clean up some of the mess that we've got just sitting around us, and have very healthy food and not need 10 bushels.
Yeah, we barely scratched the surface
I
of
know.
biology that's actually going. How many of you heard Paul Stamets talking this morning? You know, I mean, there's one guy here, and he got a $300,000 grant, and he's feeling great. Monsanto spent $1.1 billion just to buy up the genetics of corn in the Midwest. Not research, just to make sure they had control of it. You know, Monsanto has spent more on PR and buying other companies than we have spent ever looking at the kind of stuff that Paul Stamets works on, or you guys work on at your farm, or, you know, I mean, there's mountains maybe out there to be climbed, but there are mountains in understanding the biology we depend on, as opposed to the mountain of how to beat it into submission.
I'm just talking about just doing it because we can do it. That is
Yeah.
definitely out there.
And we can begin to understand how these systems work. You know, I hear all the time, well, how are you going to, you know, if you don't have the pesticides and herbicides and all this stuff, how are you going to farm? Well, I've been on places that have been in continuous agricultural production in that one spot for 1,000 years. You know, and
Really?
yeah, and there's a place in the Philippines, you know, and there's in Mexico. There's an agricultural system in the central eastern highlands of Mexico, milpas, where it's a corn, squash, bean, livestock rotation culture. We could spray it on a corn plant when the corn plant was about 1 foot high, and that protected that corn plant from corn borers. We sprayed it on June, and it was still protecting the plant in August. And we could do that for a cost that was equivalent to the cost of the premium, the technology fee for BT corn, and it worked. And we tested this on, got the permits and did all the EPA thing and tested it on several thousand acres. We sprayed this through a pivot system in Nebraska, and it worked. And we couldn't raise a nickel from it because we couldn't patent it.
Right.
And this is a system, you could do this, you could go out and when you make your lay-by pass, you go cultivate your corn up, you could spray this fungus on the top of it, about $3 an acre, and you could get the same effect as you get with BT corn. It would protect that plant from corn.
And why couldn't you patent it?
Because it's a natural piece of biology.
Yeah.
We didn't do anything to it. We discovered
I
the
see, you didn't add a gene to it.
We didn't add a gene to it, we didn't manipulate it, we just grew this fungus. And that's the dilemma we're in, you know, and that whole program cost us less than $200,000 to do that piece of research. And for a couple $1 million, you could replace BT corn with naturally occurring fungus and get the same result. And that, we don't give ourselves the capacity to do that. Our universities don't do this, our industry doesn't do it, venture capitalists don't do it, and those are the systems we got to get a handle on. It's politics in this country. And, I don't know, we diverted from your question here, but
No, actually, you did really good. Because that was the whole point, is there's other things out there. It's just kind of like a lot of the stuff in the health food store can't be patented, but there's a market, and it's growing every day. It's the only part of the grocery market that is growing,
yeah.
as we heard.
And organic agriculture is growing 20% a year.
So there is a market for what you're saying. It's not a chemical or a corporate market, which is good. We don't want those boys involved.
But
You know,
we need
how
to,
do we want to be healthy?
we just barely scratched the surface of those systems.
But,
And that's where our research should be going.
Yeah.
Okay, lady in orange?
I'm just, I keep seeing visions of the Irish potato famine. Part of what I'm curious about is, I had kids come into my classroom a week ago and tell me that off the web they had learned that the Apollo program was a hoax. And there was a Fox TV program that helped them learn about that too. How do I help kids determine the difference between sources that can provide valuable information about good organic products and bogus things like what's going on across town this weekend, talking about miracle medicines that are going to cure everything, the pseudoscience end of holistic medicine, because I think that's one of the biggest problems in people throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They don't want to talk organics because they think you're some sort of a hokey, I can cure you with magnets person.
Part of it is just your own common sense, your own searching. I mean, you already questioned Fox News. I mean, you know. So that's got to be a lot of it. It's just, and just coming to things like this, engaging in discussions, get outside it. You know, if you have an Irish kid in your class and they ask about the Irish potato famine, the Irish potato famine was a wheat export problem, not a potato famine. While there was 1 million Irishmen starving to death, they were exporting wheat to England. And that's the same thing that's going on while there's thousands of Mexicans starving to death, they're sending tomatoes to the US. And so a lot of it is how you just use your common sense to frame the question.
What journals do you recommend that kids could read that could give them the valuable information to begin to understand?
How young are kids?
High school?
There's, excuse me for interrupting, but as far as like an example with the potato family, there's a potato raiser in the valley who doesn't use any chemicals, and his philosophy is, since it works for them and has for years, that if you have healthy plants, they're not going to be attacked by everything else. It's like if our immune system is strong, we don't have to worry about all the healthcare things because about 90% of it's already taken care of. And I come from a livestock family, so you don't have to have the vet very often if the animals are in good shape. But I never correlated it with plants before he mentioned that. And yet went like, hello, why should that have been such a far stretch? But he said, and they've been doing this for quite a few years now, and they don't use any of the toxic stuff. And just like, and if you keep it strong, you know, if you keep your plants strong, then you don't have to worry about the majority of your.
Sure, it's growing organically.
That's the basis of organic agriculture, is the health of the soil.
Right.
That's what it's all
Her
about.
And
question
for
is
us.
hugely valid. I mean, trying
Yeah,
to
it is,
tell
yeah.
the difference between good
Yeah.
science and bad science and
It's just to
quackery.
get good connections.
And how to express that to somebody of this particular age. I mean, is there anyone in that
Well-
room that feels closer to that particular age?
Well,
than
it's
what you-
going back, to the original way of farming and growing. It's going back, back in history, and traditional growing was organically. So to not be so hoaxy and weird and crystal-like or whatever, people can say, well, growing organically is just a traditional way of growing. That's one way to explain it to people about
I think-
organics versus.
And a different
non-organic.
approach that's plant positive instead of pest negative. Like that
Exactly.
something's attacking your.
If they actually understood what healthy anything, how it can take care of itself versus trying to do it for it.
There's some, I think a really good source of information on more of the social and economic issues that go along with this, that's probably the most accessible for high school age kids, is probably Global Exchange, would be my guess. Kevin Danaher, he was in, they have a lot of very, they got some pretty esoteric stuff, but they do have quite a bit of just basic information about the way trade and agriculture and things like that work in the world. And I don't know how to tell you that you can know that it's reliable, other than when you read it, it sort of makes sense. I mean,
Well, I think part of the key too with this is they need to be looking more than one article. Okay,
Yeah.
this is what this article said. Okay, let's go find 2 or 3 more articles and what do they say?
yeah, part of it is just teaching kids to question.
Right.
And we've got a problem here with passive reception of information, I think.
Yeah.
There's the TV thing, is you sit and let it wash over you and go to bed or something. But just teaching kids to question, and the best thing you can probably do to teach kids about agriculture is take them on a tour of an organic farm here from one of these fine people. Show them dirt. And microscopes are really cool things to have in classrooms. You take dirt, there's an average healthy organic soil has somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 million microbes per gram.
I did a dirt thing last spring just by accident, And, I mean, we were doing basic soil tests, but I had some containers that I had brought from my house as samples for the different soil tests in baby food jars, and just forgot them and let them sit for a week. And the ones that were dirt from my garden grew funguses. The really high nitrogen, high quality stuff I bought from the store wouldn't grow anything.
They sterilized it.
There's lots of resources on the issue of genetic engineering and other things in the handout that I gave you. Did you get one?
Yes.
And then there's also a website that the Rodale Institute is working on called The New Farm, which is starting to be a resource for organic farmers across the whole country. And it has a lot of information on it. Newfarm.org.
I think Arrow, Montana has some information for curriculum for high school students as well.
Oh.
An organization in Helena, and they have some
I
extra
picked up
stuff.
some of their stuff yesterday.
Yeah,
Dr. Jim is
they
on
have
that
a
board.
conference November 1st in Chico.
Who is it?
Arrow.
Oh, yeah.
And you're on the board?
No.
I worked with them.
You work for them.
I wonder how many high school science classes have ever had readings or book by naturalists that define natural ecosystems and relationships. I think this is a really, from what I've heard, and I haven't been in high school in a few years, this is a real weakness in most high school curriculum. You know, how many people in high school would read, for instance, San County Almanac? I think therein lies a big gap in people's understanding of biological systems. And I'll point this out as an experience I had. Cliff and I worked together along with other people on the issue of genetically engineered wheat at the last legislative session. I heard over and over again reasons why we had to have genetically engineered wheat. One senator from northeastern Montana says, we've got a horrible problem with wheat stem softfly. We need genetically engineered wheat that will solve that problem. Well, I was out there on farm tours this last summer, visited a very innovative conventional farm. They don't use very many chemicals. They use a lot of rotations. He does grow some wheat. That's not his main crop. He has livestock. He grows cool and warm season grasses. He grows legumes. He grows oil seeds. And he has a very flexible cropping system. His neighbor, who's grown wheat for 25 years in a row, maybe more, wheat, fallow, wheat, fallow, wheat, fallow. He has a horrible problem with wheat stem soft flies. You know, it's no mystery what's going on here. You've got a biological desert where you're growing one crop and you're selecting out those insects which can attack that crop. Therefore, his logic, the senator, is we need genetically engineered wheat to solve that problem. That's the short-sightedness of our intellectual processing as a people.
Was that his
We
farm?
don't understand biological systems. It's not that
Let's manipulate
complex.
them instead.
Your observation comes soundly between his question of good and bad and her question of what's your goal.
Yeah.
What is our viewpoint of good and bad? What is our viewpoint of what are your goals?
Well, the goal
You
that
touched it
civil
right in between.
society has agreed on is that there should not be 1 billion hungry people on the planet with more than enough food. That's.
Or has it? I mean, it's looking like that's the status quo.
It's not the status quo. That number is increasing, both in percentage and absolute numbers,
Okay.
as a direct result of the economic policies that we've been foisting on the world for the last 20 years.
Or it's increasing as a direct, the more successful we
Population.
are at growing for food, the more the disparity will be between the amount of that food and the people that aren't getting it.
The sad part is the food we're growing doesn't have that much nutrition.
Right.
Yeah.
So even if we give it to everybody in the world, they're gonna start looking like us, excuse me, but look at this, I gained 100 pounds with kidney failure. And back to it, we shouldn't be so proud of ourselves for growing so much when it's really not much more than pillows of hot air.
We're
Well,
really good at growing starch.
Right.
Yeah, look what it's doing to us.
I'd like to get back to her question of what should she tell her students. And there's two things. Number one, I think that teaching people what is science and being able to discriminate between good science and bad science will go a long ways. It's instead of giving them a fish, you teach them how to fish. 2% of the medical literature is only 2% is based on scientific method. The rest of it is really not that good in terms of being able to trust it. And that should tell us something, that a lot of science out there is not very good science. So then we have to be able to discriminate, be able to realize what good science is. And you have to realize that science is limited. Science can only hypothesize. It does not prove anything. It only gives you a certain weight of evidence. And so that's one thing you can do. The other thing is there are some wonderful authors, and I don't know if you've mentioned this already. One of them, I'm trying to remember his first name, but his last name is Altieri, A-L-T-I-E-R-I.
Miguel.
Yeah, Miguel. Okay. And he has some wonderful papers on agroecology. And so if you go to PubMed, and have the students do this, go to PubMed and put in the word agroecology and search on those and give them those papers. They might be a little bit over their head, but hey, what can they figure out? And then help them to read those papers and help them to decipher what these papers are saying. Also, the other thing is in traditional medicine, we have the same problem with herbal medicine, and that is, who do we trust? So number one, we trust good science, not bad science. And the second form of information we trust is traditional medicine that's been used for hundreds of thousands of years. And so we look at that and we say, hey, if it has been used for 2,000 years, there must be something to it. So those are the two things. The other two forms of information that we don't trust as much are folklore and anecdotal information. Of course, what is anecdotal? But folklore is not that strong. So if you can help your students to decipher what is good, strong information and what is maybe not so good or needs to be strengthened, that would help them a lot.
And I think the other thing is to teach, one of the things that happens, the more students are in school, the more reductionist things get, especially in the sciences. And we need to teach kids to make connections. I spend a lot of time with scientists who have the blinder that we got to make genetically engineered wheat to solve sawfly problems because they can't look at how, that's taught in school. The more you study in school, the more narrow it gets. And we really need, especially in high school, I think, to help the kids make connections. Connect science and economics and connect social stuff. And there's a corollary too. I think that any time you hear a corporate lobbyist say sound science, you hold your wallet and run for it.
I was wanting to get back to his question about when ecology is taught in science. Is that what you were asking?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I think her question was about how to teach this stuff effectively.
Well, I know, but you were bringing up, somebody else brought up the point about when are ecosystems talked about and when, how much of that is coming up in the high school. Now, I teach 7th grade, and you probably teach 9, 12. Yeah, and where do you teach?
9th grade.
9th grade, okay, so, from my experience, if you're following the textbook, the ecological stuff is always at the back. And if you're following the book, you end up, you never get there. And so what I've done in the 7th grade, and it's partly because I was very fortunate in the fact that I taught for 7 years and then I went to get my master's here at MSU in Fish and Wildlife Management. So my whole classroom switched when I came back because what I did was I went to an ecosystem-based classroom from day one, and what we're doing is we're looking at all the parts, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll put them all together. So actually, they're seeing the connections even now as we speak. But in the classic classroom, I'm afraid that there isn't that much ecosystem talk and connectedness actually that's happening unless the teacher is making a very pointed effort, and to bring in those connections. In my class, the kids find themselves analyzing 12 years of previous data that was collected by their peers. So then that brings in math, and then they have to write reports and they have to do graphs, and we're not doing it on the computer because they have absolutely no idea what the computer is doing for them. All they know is, they don't even know what the X and the Y axis is on the computer until they have to do it on their own piece of paper first, then they can go to the computer, but, you know, but their connections with, you know, history and economy, we bring in, you know, the fall of, the decline of the bald eagles in Glacier Park because of mice and shrimp, that brings up history, that brings up social stuff, that brings up, you know, loss of economics in the Flathead Valley because of that whole fishery, you know, dropping like a rock. And my goal is to try to somehow, you know, figure out, you know, since the idea is to look at bald eagles, and that's what our focus is. But how are bacteria connected to them? How are, you know, amoebas connected, and how are the fish connected? So it's really, I don't use a book. And it's one of those things that, you know, I'm following the curriculum as I need to hit those things, but I'm not, I'm afraid if you're following the book, the last few chapters are always the one on ecosystems.
When, there are two things along that line, though this is far away from genetics that frighten me, and going back to large corporate control. If you're looking at a grand plan, basically the textbooks in the United States are controlled by
Absolutely.
what the state of Texas and the state of California purchase, and what the state of Texas and the state of California purchase are largely controlled by the right wing controlling political powers. But in addition,
controlled by the corporations.
and in addition, the more money they pull out of education, the more difficult it is to maintain teachers that care enough to do what you're describing, and to have classrooms of a size where it's physically possible to be innovative. I talked to kids who've moved here from the Salt Lake Valley, where their classroom in California classically is also an area where they have 30 kids to a classroom plus. And when you have that many children and you have 5 classes a day, all you can do is survive.
There is a counterculture growing in the world. It isn't growing as much in the United States as it is in the rest of the world. This book, take it apart. This is Frances Lappé's book, Hope's Edge. She went around the world to visit successful countercultures that are countering globalism, corporate globalism, and succeeding. And it is happening. A better world is possible. And
the Republicans in Congress may be the last ones on the planet to figure it out.
yeah, there is a revolution going on in the world. It may not be quite so visible in the United States, but it's really happening and it's growing, and we can be a part of it in our little ways. And I think we need to close here because Robin has a class after.
But one other point is, I would be happy to come and talk to sometime any class. I bet we could get, you know, let's use this meeting to engage people to come talk to your classes. You know, you guys can come talk about farming in Gallatin Valley. And you know, we'd have to think about it a little bit, but one way to get past corporate funding is use local resources. And Arrow has done.
I have a question about seed saving that never got talked about.
Currently, I'm organizing a new organization, Montana Organic Organization. We're going to have a statewide organic organization. We're having a conference, our first conference, December 5th in Great Falls.
Last week, I heard Jack Kloppenberg, a rural sociologist from Wisconsin, come talking in Missoula. It was really inspiring. One of the things he said was, he mentioned something about those bumper stickers, think locally, act locally, think locally, act locally, all that kind of stuff. So what we do on a local level, what we should be doing, are creating relationships that we would wish to see mimicked out farther and beyond our locale. So when we are acting locally, we're acting globally. So start, it's kind of hokey and corny, but this does work. Create the kinds of relationships around food. Food is the first easy one because it connects all of us. Right in your life. And if it's working, if you're smiling, other people are going to mimic that. She talked about the early adopters and all that. Create relationships locally that we'd like to see mimicked globally. And that's a small start. One other little thing has come to mind that'll be done. A long time ago, when I was in regular undergraduate school, I read an essay by this guy, Adam Michnik. I think he was from Poland, and this was before the wall had fallen and when Poland was still under the arm of the former Soviet Union. And this fellow Adam Michnik was a playwright, and he and some other dissidents had been angry about the lack of free speech and expression, and they were really angry, and things weren't going right. And then they decided one day that they were just going to start living as if things were the way they wished they were. And as soon as they did that, it was like the sun came out. And lo and behold, it caught on. And then Prague fell, the wall fell, and all sorts of other things happened. And these guys didn't start it, but there were a whole bunch of other co-developments that happened. But if you, right now, start living as if things were the way you wish they were, they would become that way for you right now.